out to an extremely high degree. What would be interesting is to see how the correlation structure, even stock-stock, changes as a function of time resolution, meaning, you know, you've only got daily returns here, but if you look at microstructure, it's very, very different than looking at daily returns. And I'm not sure how it would look if you time averaged on a week or a month or something like that and looked at the correlation structure month to month rather than using daily returns. But certainly on a microstructure, it's very, very different.
Well, I agree. I mean, of course, when you talk about high-frequency trading, then things become quite different. Even then, however, there are no terribly convincing time correlations. That is, of course, a huge controversy in which I definitely do not really want to get, both because I'm not convinced that it's dreadfully important, but okay, that is a personal opinion. And I certainly also don't have the knowledge to comment on it with any degree of competence. But I do agree, of course, there are short-time correlations. It's just not something I really wanted to get in.
And a quick question. The comment is regarding clustering. This is something that's done a lot in biology, and so many people have investigated many different algorithms. So one thought I had was that for k-means specifically, but also for other algorithms, there are methods for determining the optimal, quote, optimal number of clusters, optimal k.
Yes.
You can use various criteria, Bayesian information criterion and others to do that. So you could try that rather than coming up with 6 or 4, which seems arbitrary and subjective.
Well, it was used by, I mean, the Irdesh, who is the specialist in that sort of thing, used some kind of elbow criterion. So maybe you know what that is. So it wasn't arbitrary. Okay. I don't like this elbow criterion because I can see an elbow anywhere, to be honest. I mean, so this is the witchcraft I wanted to steer clear of to keep an honest talk.
Yeah. So the other comment related to that is that you could try also just not doing clustering at all, but using something like multidimensional scaling where you project your distances C, T1, T2 into Euclidean space, for example, 2-dimensional.
That was pre-processing. These Euclidean things I showed you are obtained by multiscaling.
By multidimensional scaling?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so, and then my question is, have you tried other norms? So you showed the L2 norm or the Euclidean norm.
L1 norm.
Oh, L1?
Yeah, it's an L1 norm. That's a problem for k-means, I fully agree.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. No, I mean, we did our homework, except that I think that our homework is not something anyone really wants to know.
Thank you very much, Francois. I enjoy very much your talk. I have a comment and a question. The comment is that I believe that there is a very relevant differences between risk, uncertainty, and volatility from a practical and from a theoretical point of view. So maybe we should address more directly that differences. Anyways, the question is as follows. I have done studies on correlations and correlograms or self-correlation. And I have found that if you take square returns or absolute returns, there is definitely a self-correlation that lasts for maybe a year.
Oh, sure, sure.
So if we think that what is happening is that there are several different ways of operation in the market, and that can teach us a lot about how it is really working, and forgetting all that stuff about irrational markets and random walks and all that is not real. Okay.
Well, okay. Again, this is the Fama-Schiller controversy to some extent. Now, what is the standard argument? It is that if there were a noticeable correlation between returns, people would use it to make money, and using it would destroy the correlation. That's the standard argument. Now, the point is, you cannot, in any obvious way, make money from knowing whether the absolute value of returns will be large or not. if you could, then these correlations would presumably be washed out as well. But since there's no obvious way in which you can make money in this manner, the way I understand it, these correlations survive. So that's certainly true. It's not a random walk because the absolute value, the diffusion constant in a sense, varies with time, or is the diffusion, well, the local diffusion constant is correlated in time. That is probably the best way of saying it. So it is indeed a far more complex system than a mere random walk. This I fully agree. On the other hand, I was insisting more on the multivariate aspects, so the instantaneous correlation of many time series, because those are not in dispute, and those do not lend themselves to arbitrage either. However, the issue of whether you want to look at volatility correlations, which is what you're talking about, right? And in particular, their long time tails, from this viewpoint, and this might also be even coupled with the interstock correlations, there's lots of stuff that could be done there. I mean, you can't fit all that could be known in 45 minutes, I'm sorry. But yes, those are all very nice remarks.
There is another question.
Yes. Thank you, Francois, for the talk. So I have a very basic question. When you look at the zeta approach and you have these beautiful pictures of horizontal lines, and you can identify crisis and prosperity or abysses. Is it? Do you get any information that you couldn't get by just staring at the SP 500? By doing that, because big crises, or you see that too. And so on. So do you have any control to say, here I can get information that's really relevant that I cannot really get by staring at the SP 500?
Let me give my most hopeful answer. Not yet.
Okay. Okay.
So what we see is very much what most other people would readily see. Still, I believe that we can now, for example, distinguish 4 states for the US economy, so you can more or less reliably assign the economy to any given state. And we have this state S3, which is at least a warning bell, so to speak. It's not, strictly speaking, a precursor, but it's something that tells you that something might go wrong, because from other states, you hardly ever get into the crisis states, whereas from S3, you do 6% of the time. So such numbers do have some kind of meaning, and I'm not sure that this is already well known to everybody, so to speak. Probably it is, but it's at least not entirely obvious just by staring at elementary data.
Okay, well, thank you. We have to move to the next talk. Todavía no está montada. ¿Se vas a montar?
¿La traen en Emisión?
Sí, aquí consta pulso. Tenemos que dar por esto.
¿Puedes doblar el alambrito para que quede?
¿Ah, sí? ¿Está bien? Que dice Talk C3.
¿PowerPoint?
Puede ser de PowerPoint o un PDF.
¿Solamente es ese archivo?
Espero que sí. Sí.
Y sacamos esto.
No. ¿No me pones eso bien? Es que ya... Sí, por favor.
¿Ese es tu bolsa? ¿Me la prestas tantito? Well, while they're setting up the next talk in the computer, I have two announcements.
¿Cómo se mueve eso?
The first one is that yesterday, someone forgot here in this room a bag like this,
¿Le puedo dar
but
la
it
vuelta?
had a charger inside. So if somebody found this bag, please return it to us as soon as possible. And the second announcement, this is only for the members of the center. Hoy a las 12 hay una vacuna de la influenza en el Salón 26 para los que quieran ir a ponérsela. Well, thank you. Thank you, Hernan, for coming. It is a very great pleasure for me to introduce Hernan Larralde. He is a professor at the Center for Physical Sciences of the University in Cuernavaca, and he accepted to be with us today talking on the statistics of text.
Gracias, Max. I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation, and all of you, I'd like to thank you in advance for your patience, please. I'm going to talk about some of the results we've found on text. Of course, not all of them are new by a far stretch, but it's been a lot of fun. Most of the work I'm going to talk about was done with Diego Espitia, who's actually not here. He's out in San Luis Potosí right now, and Alfredo Gonzalez, who's sitting around there. And any questions on the data, ask him, please. Okay. So let me begin talking about my motivation. This is not Diego's motivation. My original motivation is the Library of Babel, which is a story written by Jorge Luis Borges in 1941. I found this translation. I'm not going to put the whole story. I'll take the whole hour, which is not a bad idea. It's more fun. So in the story, Borges talks about the universe, which others call the library, that is composed by an indefinite and perhaps infinite number of hexagonal galleries. What's going on? Okay, perhaps let's try it now. Of hexagonal galleries with vast air shafts, and in each of the shelves in these hexagonal walls, there are books. Okay, so that's the whole idea of this library. There's 35 books in each shelf. Each book is 410 pages. Each page 40 lines. Each line 80 letters. And Borges talks about a few axioms. The library exists ab eterno. Infinities are one of Borges's obsessions. And another axiom is that the orthographical symbols in the books are 25 exactly. And noticing this allowed people to understand why most of the books were full of chaotic sequences, and had formless and chaotic nature of almost all the books. There. The book tells, well, the story goes on and talks about this chief that found a book that was as confusing and messed up as any other, but had 2 pages of homogeneous lines. And he actually found a coder who told him that those lines were in Portuguese. Others said those lines were in Yiddish. And a century afterwards, the language was established as a Samoyedic Lithuanian dialect of Guarani with classical Arabian inflections. Now, this is also a typical Borges humor. And the same chief deduced that the library was total and the shelves register all the combinations of the 25 symbols. So that everything, the minutely detailed history of the future, the true story of your death, the translation of every book in all languages, all those books are in the library. And, well, he goes on, and it's a lot of fun. I won't tell all the things he imagines that are in those books, because there's the true story of your death and 1,000 or false stories of your death. And there's a book that tells you which one is the right one, right? And it goes on, okay? But he also mentions that one cannot combine the characters, and those are actually the characters he chose, which the divine library has not foreseen, and which in one of its secret tongues do not contain a terrible meaning. No one can articulate a syllable which is not filled with tenderness and fear, which is not, in one of these languages, the powerful name of a god. So, and finally, he mentions that a number of the languages use the same vocabulary. In some of those languages, the symbol library allows the correct definition of a ubiquitous and lasting system of hexagonal galleries. Everybody knows that's the definition of library. But library is bread or pyramid or anything else, and these 7 words which define it have another value. You who read me, are you sure of understanding my language? So, Borges poses a lot of really neat questions in this book, and I've always liked it very much. I think it's one of those things one can think about and ponder for years, lives, whatever, PhDs certainly. Many of these conjectures actually refer to translations, right? This is like the central point in many of these conjectures, is that the sequence of symbols might have different meanings in different languages, okay? So translation is actually a very strange operation. You're given like a sequence of a symbolic time series, WHATE, those are just letters, symbols, and you turn it into a different sequence of symbols, okay? One can look at this sequence of symbols and say, okay, those are different sequences, but somehow something is conserved. They say the same thing, right? There's something conserved in a translation of meaning, I guess. Something is conserved. So this is what interested me most in this this study of texts. Another thing Borges suggests is that this sequence, right, in some language might be this sequence, might have this meaning, right? I mean, there's a language or there might be a language according to which that sequence of symbols is actually Moby Dick, right? I mean, it could happen. This is another of Borges' ideas in the story. And the last thing he actually suggests is that this sequence, which one thinks one understands in English, might actually mean this sequence, which we also understand in English, but we don't identify as the same. But this is exactly his last suggestion, right? So these are the questions that Borges put forward in this story, and things we'd like to sort of like understand or try to understand. Okay. And finally, but it came out, didn't appear in the screen. Borges suggests that some of those messed up texts are actually cryptograms. Okay, this is he wrote this in 1941. In 1949, this guy called Warren Weaver, which we don't know much about, but he was a very important mathematician and scientist and promoter of science in the United States. He wrote this something called the translation memorandum, and he actually suggests that translation could be posed as cryptography, right? This is a nice way of looking at it. And you have this thing, it's a message in Russian. You can say, no, this is in English, right? It's just coded in Russian, right? And then translating is sort of analogous to decoding, okay? So actually this insight that Borges had later appeared in this translation memorandum. Actually, this guy and this document is very important because it sets the basis to machine translation. This is the first person, and in this document, where the concept of computers translating or decoding text was put forward by this guy. So Borges' insight, 8 years before that, was already that translation and cryptography are somehow analogous. So with this in mind, I'm going too fast. With this in mind, we have also a pet project, which is what Diego, the student who actually did most of this work together with Alfredo, likes very much. This is a page from a book from the 1450s, more or less, which is called the Voynich manuscript. And it's a very beautiful book. It's full of pictures of naked women in green and some strange things that remind of like stars. Could be mandalas, I hadn't thought of that. Plants. No, but these are usually thought of as astronomy pictures, some kind of astronomy pictures from, and so they have the plants section, and it was written around 1450. That's determined by carbon 14 dating. And the weird thing about this is that the alphabet, right, is completely unknown, and it's not, and hasn't been identified, neither the symbols, where these symbols come from, nor if that is just, say, Latin or Italian or Spanish or French, just written in strange. Nothing is known of the language, nothing is known of the alphabet. And it's been tried, people have tried to decode it 100 years already, and some people say they already understand 14 words. Other people doubt that's true. There's all this controversy, there's amateurs, there's conspiracy theorists. It's great, it's a lot of fun. I'm in one of those things that they send mail to, and okay. Full of weirdos. Actually, the main question is this a cryptogram or is it a hoax? Nobody knows if it might be just some guy, a wise guy, through this thing, told the I think it was the King of Austria or something like that, that this was a magical book and got 2 kilograms of gold, actually, in payment for the book. That the price, I think, is correct, more or less 2 kilos of gold. So it might be a hoax. No, it might not say anything at all. Not even that is known, whether this actually contains information or not. So it would be nice to find ways of at least giving a hint of whether this is actually a language or is it just a hoax. Okay, so the questions we want to address is when one sees this, we'd like to know, is that gibberish? Is that just a random sequence of letters? Or is it actually a language? Okay, it's the first question we would like to address, because that's actually the main question in the Voynich manuscript. Actually, is there a difference between gibberish and the language? I mean, it's not even that clear to me, at least. Okay, if that is a language, what does that say? That would be neat. No, that would be, and if we can't tell what it says, can we at least know whether this sequence of letters has the same meaning as this sequence of letters? Is there any way of looking at those sequences that I have no idea what they say, but they say the same thing? Or I have no idea what they say, but they say different things. Can one answer these questions? So in this case, sorry. So in this case, they do say the same thing, more or less, as far as Google Translate goes from Swedish to Gaelic. No? It's hard to tell, but they actually say the same thing. That's from a story by Strindberg in Swedish. And, okay, nobody would have guessed. I wouldn't have guessed this. Okay, so the question is, how does a language look like? When you're walking down the street and you find these letters and do they say something? Is that a language? Is that not a language? Okay, and this is not a very new question, it's an old question, and the most usual approach to this is word frequency statistics, right? This is something everybody has heard of, and you'll hear it again today, certainly, okay? And perhaps the most famous of all the results in statistics of texts is Zipf's law, okay? Which states that if you have a large text, right, and you order the words according to the highest frequency first, and then the next highest frequency, and so on, which is called ranking them, then you can actually, you plot that, log-log plot. Turns out that they follow pretty closely on a nice power law, right? Actually, that's very surprising, and it occurs for all natural languages, all of them. I confess that's from Wikipedia, okay? But here we have this log of the rank of the words, log of their frequencies, from the documents in Wikipedia in Esperanto, Latin, Ukrainian, Czech, Italian, blah, blah, blah. Goes on and on and on, right? It's amazing, it's surprising. These are the kinds of things statistical physicists like myself get all excited about. Wow, there has to be something like really deep there. Because all these languages follow this law. You can say, well, that's not a perfect power law. Oh, yeah, okay, but this is real life, okay? So it's pretty close to a good power law. It deviates at very, very high ranks, but most of it, at least, is pretty straight, okay? So of course, we don't take things, we don't believe people. We get, and there is the SIP plot, like of Don Quixote, Dorian Gray, and the Voynich, okay? And hey, it's not bad. It's actually not bad at all, right? And humans are very bad at imitating randomness. We're really bad at it. So if it was a hoax, this guy had to think, how am I gonna do this and satisfy SIP's law while writing down a hoax, right? So this is actually a very argument in favor of the fact that the Voynich manuscript may not be a hoax, right? Because it follows SIP's law. So we were very happy, and we actually wanted to check this carefully. This is a variation of the SIP plot. This is cumulative and normalized. So this is the SIP plot for the Little Prince. And then what we did is we actually took away all the spaces, so we couldn't recognize words again, and then put them back at random, okay? So we get SIP's law back, okay? So turns out, basically whatever you do, you get SIP's law. Now, it's not true, but almost, okay? SIP's law is perhaps a little too universal. We've tried, for example, measuring the transition matrix between successive symbols in a book, and actually in Moby Dick, and then we wrote, actually Alfredo wrote, a program that made a Markov process of symbols with spaces between, and sure enough, we get SIP's law. No? We're not the first people to actually find this. SIP actually thought that SIP's law, his law, actually he didn't call it his own law. Somebody else had already found something similar, but it was related to the capacity to transmit information. Afterwards, Mandelbrot argued that, and he did call it SIP Mandelbrot. Apparently Mandelbrot had a very high opinion of himself. He actually proposed that it arose from the optimal transmission of information. That's what was behind this phenomenon. And he said that SIP's argument was not based in the least on any serious linguistic theory, just dismissing him immediately. But very soon thereafter, for example, this guy, George Miller, said that SIP's law can be derived from simple assumptions that do not strain one's credibility. They were not friends, obviously. And unless the random placement of spaces seems incredible. And you don't have to appeal to least effort, least cost, maximal information, or any branch of the calculus of variation. And this was in response to Mandelbrot. The problem was, this was published in the Journal of Psychology, so physicists didn't read it. And many years afterwards, 1992, right, Wen-Tian Li actually discovered that random texts exhibit SIP's law-like word frequency distribution. This is still actually, oh God. This is still more or less controversial because those papers were 1997, 2003. These guys from Spain were still actually relating SIP's law to least effort. And then when people pointed out that random texts looked alike, they actually tried very hard to convince, with not very much success, that's not the case. And the thing is that it's still controversial. But what is clear is that if you do a rank order, a SIP plot, and you see something that looks like a power law, you can't really argue that that is necessarily a language. At least I can't. So we had to think of something different. There's this thing called co-occurrence network, which is, in the simplest case, actually just an adjacency network, where, for example, here, this poem, which doesn't appear complete, doesn't matter. I'll use it just to show how we build a network, which is very simple. Put all the words in a plane, and we use them as nodes. And then we connect the nodes if one word follows another. So the poem goes una noche, right? So there is una noche, and it actually repeats it. So una noche, una noche, una noche, ¿no? Toda llena de murmullos en el, toda llena. That's it. Okay, right? And it's beautiful. You generate this nice network, and you think of it, it sounds great. It's like you have a map to each text. And if you put arrows, you can, yes? It can be direct or undirected. This drawing is undirected, but you can do it directed. And actually, if you do it directed, you follow the arrows and reconstruct the whole text, which is really neat. And then, well, we have this network. We want to do what people do with networks and study the statistics of the network. And here is the co-occurrence network edge distribution, right? The degree distribution of the network for Don Quixote, which is a great power law part. If you notice here, it's the odd ones that deviate, but the even ones fall there, and that would be 1, 3, 5, 7. By 9, they're all there. Okay? And so this is another thing. You see it and say, okay. So maybe this is critical. Maybe this is what one wants to actually look at. No? Here we shuffled the letters, all the letters of Don Quixote, and built the co-occurrence network. We get almost the same thing. The only precisely on these odd guys, right? Which are only 3 or 4. Everywhere else, they're indistinguishable. So once again, right, this thing that looks like really meaningful appears to be like ubiquitous and not really related to the fact that it's a language. More related to the fact that you can recognize words and you're looking at a one-dimensional string of symbols. So here's Moby Dick shuffled. You get the same thing. Again, here are the odd guys, but everything else is. Right? Another classic statistic is Heaps' law, which says that the number of distinct words in a document grows as a power of the length of the document. Okay, so so this is a check. We chose those 4 books in different languages, and so, sure enough, okay, it's not a perfect power law, but it's pretty good over several decades, and it looks more promising. So let's keep just Moby Dick. That's what it looks like. You could say you've seen better power laws than that, sure, right? That's a better power law. And this is actually what we did the same thing. We got rid of all the spaces and then placed them back at random. That's all we do. And we get actually Heaps' law back. If anything, perhaps we should be looking at the differences from a power law, because I mean, when you do random spacing, you get a very good power law, and this is not such a good power law. Perhaps we should be looking at the differences from power law, and not at the power law itself. So.
Random spaces, uniform distribution, or
No. So we get rid of all the spaces, and then with probability around 1/2 between every two letters, we put a space or not. So we go throw a coin, no, no, yes, yes, no, and it goes on like that. That's all we do, right? The idea of keeping the letter order, the original letter order is that there are rules to spelling, right? People don't usually use like 3 T's in a row, okay? So that way we can conserve, for example, the spelling rules and generate more or less random words. Okay, so Heap's law is actually too universal too. But of course, one can look at more things in a network. So we looked at the clustering coefficient, which is the ratio of the number of links between my neighbors against the total number of possible links that could exist between all my neighbors, right? For each node. And I'll just go by very quickly. Here we show a plot of the average clustering coefficient as a function of the degree of each node, and it's not a power law, certainly, okay? And if we now shuffle all the words, we get, this is the shuffled case, this is the real case. Shuffled and real, and we see at least a systematic decrease in the clustering coefficient. And okay, it's not a big decrease, but there's something there. And actually, if we plot all these things together, we see that many languages have a clustering coefficient that more or less behaves similarly. And these two, at least Turkish and Arab, separate, okay? And where does Voynich fall? There's Voynich, okay. So at least Voynich might be one of these European languages, German, French, English, Spanish, and Voynich. Okay. So what about meaning? So there's nothing we found there that's actually related to the meaning of the text. So, of course, what does meaning mean? And it's hard, especially in a language you don't know, right? How can we measure meaning? Is there any way? Or must we actually know every language to assign meaning to a text? Perhaps that's the only way. Even the Samoyedic Lithuanian dialect of Guarani with classical Arabian inflections. That might be the only way to assign meaning. But a usual way of trying to do this is to identify keywords, right? And this is famously, although things are always more complicated in real life, but more or less how the Rosetta Stone deciphering worked. They found the keywords, and that was it. They found them in the 3 texts. They knew what they meant in Greek, and that's it. And then, okay, it took 100 years, but it worked eventually. So how do you define keywords? And there's many ways, and this is a very popular way called TF-IDF. It's really called that way, which means term frequency, inverse document frequency. And it's a way to assign a number to a word. And the formula is actually rather simple. If you have a corpus of many books, say, many texts, and you actually see how frequent is your term in that whole corpus, right? That's the term frequency, okay? And the inverse document frequency is, in this case, the negative logarithm of the number of texts in which your word appears over the total number of texts in your corpus. If a word appears in every text, this is 1, logarithm is 0, of course, and of course it's not a keyword, because a word that appears in every text is perhaps the word the, right, or is. Those are words that you usually wouldn't identify as keywords. So words that appear in few documents, but with high frequency, right, will give you a very high number of, a very high value of this TF-IDF. And that's one way of identifying these keywords. But this is for keywords over a corpus like Google. This is basically, okay, there are versions, variations on these functions, but this is more or less what Google does. But we don't have a corpus, okay? We only have one text, say, Moby Dick, right? So how are we going to use these kind of ideas? So we did a very perhaps lame thing, but that's what we could do, which is we cut the text into we call them chapters. They're not real chapters. We just cut it into a large number of chapters, okay? And instead of using exactly that formula, we use a similar formula, but it's not exactly the same, which is, again, the negative, the negative of the word frequency, which is there, times the logarithm, and this is the number of chapters in which the word appears, over this m, which is the mean number of chapters the word would appear if you put it at random, okay? So if you throw words at random, evenly, but randomly distributed in your text, then, and you cut the text into k chapters, in average, you would find the word in this number of chapters, okay? So, because in a sense, a word that's placed at random cannot really have a very important meaning, right? It can't be key to the text, or at least that's our hypothesis. Second, this is very similar to the TF-IDF. For large frequencies, this term is negligible, and then we only have k, which is the number of chapters. So for very large frequencies, we recover the normal TF-IDF. And the other thing this helps a lot is it gets rid of what's called the hapax. Hapax legomenen are words that appear once. And words that appear once are untranslatable, right? If you don't know the language, you can't translate a word that appears once and you can't identify it with any other. And actually 40% of the vocabulary in a large book, 40% are hapax, more or less. So it's a good idea to get rid of them. No? And of course, hapax means has frequency 1, right? So there's the number of chapters that will appear is 1, and certainly a hapax will appear in 1, and that's it. The whole thing vanishes. Okay? So this is how we assign keyness in text. And okay, so we've got a lot of keywords. What do we do with that? So we have keywords. So this is 3 more or less keywords from The Origin of Species, Darwin's masterpiece, I guess. That looks actually rather nice. So our idea, or what we are trying to do, still trying, is to use this as a barcode, right? Like you do in a supermarket, right? If one can somehow use this, which is very little information, to barcode a text, okay? Then you can identify it. Then you can sit down, check for the keyword, construct the barcode, and then just compare barcodes and find out whether it's the same text or it's new text, right? So this is more or less the central idea behind what we're trying to do right now. And this is sorry. This is the word count in the origin of species. There's the first word, that's the last word, and all these points are words. And the black lines are where this word appears, okay? So the word instinct appears here many times and then doesn't appear in all this part of the book. The word islands appears a lot in this chapter that is. Obviously it has to do with islands. I mean, that's the idea. Whereas, however, looks like randomly distributed. This is a word that seems to be not very meaningful, right? Whereas instinct and islands appear to be very meaningful, right? That's basically the idea. So yes, I'm sorry. This is the location of this word in the complete text, or this word in the complete text. Okay? Sorry about that. So, and we hope that if we can identify the correct keywords, then the barcode you construct should pretty much match across translations, okay? Even if you don't know what the word means. If you generate a barcode, and then you find the same barcode in another book, and it has to be the same word, and it has to be the same book. Come on. Somehow, that just has to be the case. Or at least that's what we hope. So this is the barcode for fox, zorro, renard, and fuchs. I can't pronounce German. So this, again, here we normalized the length of the book to 1, because they don't have exactly the same length in different languages. And then just plotted the position in which the word appears. And man, they're identical, right? I mean, they have to be identical, right? So I mean, this doesn't prove anything, but it's a point in the direction that we want to make, that it's these barcodes, we can identify them, then we can identify books without knowing their language. Yes. You recognize it immediately, of course. No. This is, I guess, squire. I don't know how you say that in English. Escudero is the guy who carries the shield. Eh? Yeah, sort of. Okay, from El Quijote. Okay, so once again, this is escudero in French, or escudero in Spanish, and again, it's a perfect match. Come on, it's really great. Okay, so so what is the strategy? We take a text, we find the, say, 100 most important words according to our criteria, and we do this with several texts, and then correlate their positions, right, and match those that have the highest correlation coefficient. And that's basically what we did. So what happens? In Quixote, we identified this word with that word. That's pretty good. No? And we did it exactly that way, right? Don, gobernador, Zoraida, Sancho, Quijote, señor, venta, caballero, historia, escudero, cura, don, Quijote. Here we made a mistake, and it's a very understandable mistake, because Don Quixote are always together, right? So of course, if Quixote has a large correlation with Quixote, right? Then Don will also have a large correlation. So it's a mistake, certainly it's a mistake, but it's an understandable mistake. Espada, mujer, padre, ventero, duquesa. These words, at least for El Quijote, work pretty well. We've done these things for Spanish, German, Spanish, English, and the subset of words that are common to all languages is actually very high. I didn't make a view graph of that, but it's actually very high and very satisfying. Here is from 10,000 Leagues, And again, the match is actually very good. Ned, rojo, captain, meters, all these words were matched just by looking at their position correlation. Huh? But, one can say, okay, you can do that always. Well, these, let's put it like this. Moby Dick has 200,000 words. So if you're going to correlate all words in Moby Dick versus all words in Moby Dick, then you're going to need a supercomputer. This way, we actually just check like 100 by 100 words and get the matches immediately. So we're still far from our goals. We're still far from actually being able to say anything about Borges' conjectures, and I will welcome all suggestions. And thank you very much.
Questions?
Well, thinking about this sentence or this invitation you are giving us on the suggestions, maybe if you haven't, well, I'm wondering if you have, you and your collaborators thought about on this analysis on the clustering coefficient, maybe it could be interesting in seeing how the new communications nowadays with Twitter and all that stuff, or by text messaging, that mostly young people use letters to refer to some phrases or words. I don't know, it came to my mind now, the
WTF.
LOL, for example, laugh or something. And maybe that could be an interesting analysis too, just to see how a language, or maybe the universal communication, perhaps between different languages, how we can use letters, universal letters, to refer to some ideas or express some universal feelings or in that. And maybe how these feelings or these, I don't know, these acronyms are getting more important with the pass of the time, and that, of course, has an impact on the original language.
No, certainly. Yes, actually, that would be a very nice thing to look into. People have looked at the evolution of languages in time, the evolution of the statistics of languages as a function of time. But I don't know of work done in Twitter, and nobody will want to actually let me read their WhatsApp messages. I'm sure they won't let me read them. I thought, really? Did he say that? Oh, come on. No. No, but Twitter, of course, are actually open, so everybody can read them. So yeah, I think that'd be very, very interesting. There's a lot of things one can play with, and actually, the good thing is there's a lot of data too. So that'd be a fun idea. I'll tell Alfredo actually is who does the work to actually try to get data and see what we can find.
Thank you for your talk. I have two quick technical questions. One is, how are the letters in Voynich coded? So you analyze them. What letters do you use?
Actually, there's several transcriptions of the symbols in Voynich to normal ASCII symbols. There's several transcriptions because there's some controversy as to whether some of those symbols are actually two symbols combined or one symbol. So depending on different people, there have been a couple of codings. But now they're free access, and you just have to. I think one is the most popular. I don't remember the name, but one is the one that's commonly used, and you can find the whole Voynich transcribed into those symbols. So.
Okay, thank you. The other quick question, if I may, was, are the barcodes the same size? I know they're normalized to 1, but do they have the same number of elements? Probably
No,
not.
usually not.
No, that's why you use the correlation rather than something like the Hamming distance.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, thank
Actually,
you.
I didn't say that to calculate, so I'm going to answer a question you didn't make. We actually centered a small Gaussian at the position of each letter, and then just calculated the correlation coefficient for those curves. Just easy way.
Chris.
Hey, Nan, I just want to make a provocative statement about your use of the word meaning, right? So see if you can get my meaning about your meaning. So I think if you think of the Rosetta Stone, right? So
I didn't understand.
If you think of the Rosetta Stone, the only reason it was useful was because there was one or more languages on it where meaning meant I could see a symbol there, or see sequence of symbols, and look at the representation of that set of symbols in the world. You know, the king or pyramid or whatever it would be as a physical or even mental object. The thing is that I believe it's literally impossible to look intrinsically at language itself and derive anything to do with meaning, right? Because meaning is to do with external or internal representations of those symbols. And here what you're looking at is just looking at, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's cool results to go and you can identify what are the important through frequency, etc., through statistics from one text to another. For translation, that's useful. I mean, the thing is that you think of deep learning in translation, well, it's dumb. It's just doing what a parrot could do. The deep learning doesn't know what the words mean, right? So I think there's a lot more depth to go into about what meaning, once again, really means.
You're right, completely right. Here, it's just an attempt to perhaps try to say, have no idea what these mean, but perhaps they mean the same thing. That's what we're trying to actually do, okay? But you're right. I mean, we can't say what it means. We can only say, well, that has perhaps the same meaning as this word, which I do understand. And that's a big step, okay?
Very nice talk. Regarding this problem of the Voynich manuscript and distinguishing between a random text and a real text, I thought that Shannon's information entropy would be a standard approach in the sense that the random text would have a much higher entropy than real text, right? What is your take on that approach?
You're right too. If you use the letters place them independently, statistically independently, and then you have an information which is much higher in the random sequence than in the real text. But there's spelling rules. So that's why it's really important that we actually, for example, we keep the order of the letters and we place the spacings at random. Because that way we actually satisfy most of the spelling rules, and so we never get or seldom get combinations of unpronounceable combinations of letters, because there aren't any, or there shouldn't be any, right? And this redundancy, which appears in the spelling rules, actually lowers the entropy by a lot. Another way of doing it...
To an extent that it's indistinguishable between random and real texts?
It's really hard to measure with high precision the entropy, the letter entropy. It's very hard to measure with high precision. So they are same ballpark. Let's put it like that. The other way is doing this Markov matrix, which is also lowers a lot the entropy and gives you same ballpark results.
Philip?
Hi. So yes, I was wondering if you could steal Max Aldana's idea that he gave us yesterday. I don't know if you were here. No. He was trying to train networks to recognize strings of music, and trying to see, depending on what kind of music you try to map with your network, if you could see if you could distinguish different dynamics of networks like that and classify music or how music was generated. So I was wondering if you could steal his idea to study languages.
Yes, perhaps I can say. He actually lives in the office across the hall from me, so we can certainly.
Sometimes it's very far, you know.
No, it's actually very close. No, we haven't done that. Certainly,
Okay.
we haven't
All right.
used these algorithms, learning algorithms.
Hernan, how many different words are in Moby Dick, you said?
No, not different words.
No.
Total words are 200,000. And different words. Actually, it's there, isn't it?
Or Quixote or whatever.
Yeah. Well, actually, somewhere around here, there. So different words, it's about 20,000.
20,000.
Yeah.
So that's a little more.
This number.
But many of them appear only once, you said.
Around 40%, actually.
Okay. So my question is, you could consider each of your barcodes as a time series.
Right.
Okay. Have you studied the correlations and correlation matrix and so on?
That's what we did. Correlation between the time series obtained from different texts, right? And
but what I'm saying is, in the same book, take your different time series and see how correlated are the different barcodes in the same.
Right.
In the same. Did you do that?
Yes, we actually did it for very frequent words and for rare words. And the problem is to try to understand which words to choose, because there's 20,000 words to choose from. So, and the trick, or at least the way we're approaching this, is that we want to choose words without knowing a priori their meaning. So we have to look at their statistics and say, okay, that's a word we have to look at. So if you can't actually choose the word, there's too many things to look at. So we haven't done cross correlations between we haven't done it for many words.
Well, I suggest that if there are more questions, we can ask those in the coffee break. And let's thank Hernan again.